Gout, the disease of kings, and the curse of modern diets. Well, let's get a little history of gout. So gout, believe it or not, has been known about for centuries. In fact, hundreds of centuries. Early reference to gout was actually made by Hippocrates in the 5th century BC, described this swelling of the big toe, and he made note that it seemed to spare eunuchs and women before menopause. References were made to gout by the ancient Egyptians around 2600 BC, when physicians actually described joint pain in the big toe. Now, in the Middle Ages and the Renaissance, gout was known as the disease of kings and the king of diseases. Why? Because it seemed to affect the wealthy who indulged in rich meals, shellfish, and plenty of wine. In other words, the original lifestyle of the rich and famous. Now, famous sufferers included King Henry VIII, Isaac Newton, and even Benjamin Franklin. Franklin wrote in a letter that his gout was like a cruel partner nagging him to get off the sofa. Weird fact. In 1683, Dr. Thomas Sydenham, sometimes called the English Hippocrates, wrote the first detailed clinical description of a gout attack. He himself suffered from it and described the pain in his big toe as so intense that even the weight of a bed sheet was unbearable. Believe it or not, that's still considered a hallmark of the gout flare. But before we jump into what gout actually is and what causes it, if you like what you're hearing here at the Dr. Gundry podcast, don't forget to subscribe and, most importantly, share this with your friends and loved ones and like us. Okay, so at its core, gout is a form of inflammatory arthritis. It happens when uric acid crystals build up in the joints, most famously at the base of the big toe. Now, uric acid is a normal breakdown product of purines. These are compounds that make up our DNA, and they're also present in many foods. Now, normally, our kidneys are pretty good at filtering out uric acid. But when uric acid levels get too high, either because the body manufactures too much of it, or the kidneys can't get rid of it fast enough, these tiny, sharp crystals form. Now, these crystals are like tiny microscopic needles stabbing into the joint, triggering pain, swelling, redness, and heat. But before we go into that even more, I want you to realize why we're affected with gout and none of our other animal counterparts do. It turns out about 10 million years ago, great apes suffered a genetic mutation in how uric acid is denatured. Up until then, all animals have a enzyme called uricase that basically dissolves uric acid. Great apes lost the ability to make uricase. So what? It turns out that uric acid is made primarily from two sources. One, which turned out to be one of the major benefits, is that uric acid is a product of detoxification of fructose in the liver into two seemingly harmless compounds, triglycerides, which you have measured on your lipid profile by your doctor, and uric acid. Now, it turns out that uric acid is very good at raising blood pressure. It's very good at storing fat by promoting insulin resistance. And luckily, if you've been watching this broadcast long enough, you know that insulin resistance is something that most people in America suffer from, even though they're unaware of it. And it's the cause of diabetes, pre-diabetes, fatty liver, all because we inherited that mutation from great apes. Why was it beneficial to great apes? Because they could outcompete monkeys for fruit in a diminished climate change where forests were shrinking. And great apes could take the fructose in fruit and convert it into fat and uric acid and store fat for the winter. We inherited that mutation. Now, for years, we thought this mutation was the Thrifty Gene because we had the ability to endure long periods of time with little or no food. And we thought that that ability to store fat was a Thrifty Gene. It wasn't until recently that we realized that the Thrifty Gene was actually the mutation that allowed us to keep making uric acid and not dissolve it, and allowed us to store fat for the winter that now never comes. So that's why we have these high levels of uric acid. Now, if you watch my episode 194 with my friend Dr. David Perlman, we discussed his best-selling book, Drop Acid, which is all about how most of us make far too much uric acid. And most of us make it, as I tell my patients, from three things. Number one, fruit and fruit juices. Number two, concentrated fruit like wine or beer. Number three, animal protein purines, particularly fish and shellfish. So those are the three major contributors that I see in my patients to raising uric acid levels. Okay, so what are the classic symptoms of gout? Like I said, incredibly painful joint pain, usually in the big toe, but it can appear elsewhere. It can appear in the elbow. It can appear in your big finger. It often strikes in the middle of the night, and people suddenly wake up in excruciating pain. It usually rapidly occurs. It kind of comes out of nowhere. Now, the problem is, even though it comes out of nowhere, the pain can last for days or even weeks. And it is one of the worst pains that a human being can experience. So even though the big toe is classic, other joints, now you can actually get these uric acid crystals that build up under the skin. They're often on the ears, the elbows, and fingers. And they almost look like little chalk areas underneath the skin. Uric acid can cause kidney stones. About half of kidney stones are uric acid stones. The other are calcium oxalate stones. And so this is a failure of the kidneys to be able to handle the amount of uric acid that's coming, and it builds up in these stones. Now, sometimes people have high levels of uric acid, hyperuricemia, without even knowing it. That's why you should always have your uric acid levels measured in a routine panel. And quite frankly, almost no doctors are trained to look at uric acid levels. And you are better off knowing your uric acid level and getting it down than suffering the consequences. And the point of all this is the consequences of high uric acid aren't limited to gout. That's kind of the end. It's not limited to uric acid stones. That's kind of the end. Where most of the time it's trouble is in causing insulin resistance, in causing elevated insulin levels, in causing metabolic dysfunction. And the sooner you know and get a handle on your uric acid levels, the easier it is going to be to avoid all these long-term complications, thanks to that genetic mutation from great apes. So why are we seeing it so much today? Well, as I mentioned, this was in a response to no longer having uricase to break down uric acid, which means that the more fructose in our food, the more likely this process is happening to you right now. So high fructose corn syrup is in almost everything. Our fruit has been bred for sugar content and size. And lastly, we have to take a clue from ancient man and great apes. Fruit was never available year-round. Even in the jungle, fruit only ripens once or twice a year. We've now made it possible to eat fruit 365 days a year. And that genetic mutation that was so beneficial to great apes and early man has now become our Achilles heel. And so looking at why that genetic mutation was beneficial and why it's so mischievous really can help you decide what you want to moderate in your diet, whether it's high fructose corn syrup, whether it's the amount of fruit in your diet, whether it's the amount of wine or beer in your diet, whether it's the amount of animal protein, particularly fish and shellfish in your diet. All of these have an impact, and you get to choose where you want to moderate it. Now, the other good news is that there are very effective ancient prescription drug treatments to lower uric acid, but there's also a very good natural substance to lower uric acid levels. And some of those do work. Tart cherry extract does work. However, as one of my patients found out, please do not drink dark cherry juice thinking that it's going to lower your gout. One of my patients created gout by drinking lots of tart cherry juice. He also made himself a diabetic, all thinking he was going to help himself, not realizing that there's still huge amounts of fructose in cherries. So the extracts of tart cherry may in fact help you, but not the juice. There's also another fascinating compound in India, which can lower uric acid levels, and it's available as a supplement. Vitamin C is useful. Quercetin is useful. And a very interesting flavonoid called luteolin also is very useful in lowering uric acid levels. Coffee lowers uric acid levels. And polyphenols in pomegranates, mentioned cherries, and green tea show some uric acid lowering effects. So all of those are options in dealing with uric acid. So if you're now worried about the disease of kings and don't want to follow that path, just remember why we make uric acid in the first place and why we probably don't want to make much uric acid anymore, and the easy steps you can take every day to lower your risk of gout. More amazing episodes just like this one. Watch now. The reason your melatonin production goes up at night is because you need repair of your mitochondria in the neurons of your brain